Hey, and welcome to the highlights of episode number 239 with Sharon Salzberg. Some of my favorite parts of this episode were when she shares with us how to lift and let go of pain and suffering and how to love your enemies. I also loved it when she shares with us her favorite Buddhism principles that have really impacted her life. But there is so much more wisdom, knowledge, and inspiration that you get in the full episode. So to listen to the full podcast and get all the info in the show notes, head on over to melissaambrosini.com/239 right now. Sharon, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here. Can you tell us your story and how you got into Buddhism and how you got to where you are today doing the work that you now do? Like, how did this all unfold for you?
It's very interesting. I went to college in Buffalo, New York, and actually I just today booked my plane ticket to Buffalo. I'm going back to teach, and it's the first time I've been there in like well over 40 years. So it's very strange. So I went to college when I was 16, and when I was a sophomore in college, I took an Asian philosophy course. And really, honestly, as far as I can remember looking back, it was almost a matter of happenstance. It's like I looked at the schedule and I thought, oh, that's convenient. That's on Tuesday or something. I'll take that one. And it completely changed my life. And part of the reason was that within that course, as they talked about the Buddha and Buddhism, they talked about the Buddha's commentary that there's suffering in life, that this is natural, it's inevitable, it's a part of life. And I, like many people, had a childhood that was full of chaos and loss and confusion. And like for many people, my family system was one where this was never, ever spoken about. And so I didn't know what to do with all of those feelings inside of me and that terrible feeling of isolation, of being so different and kind of on the margins of life rather than in the center. And here was the Buddha saying, no, everybody suffers, not to the same degree or in the same way, but this is a part of life. And so that in itself was hugely liberating. And then I heard in that course that there were these practices you could do, that there were actually practical methods you could undertake that could make you be happier. They could help you. And these were called meditation. So I looked around Buffalo, and this was 1970. And, it was long before there were yoga centers everywhere, and I just didn't see it anywhere. So the university had an independent study program where if you created a project that they liked and they approved of, you could go anywhere in the world. The theory was for a year, and you'd come back and do your final year there. So I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they accepted it. So off I went. I left in the fall of 1970, and I began my first intensive meditation retreat, because that's the form within which I learned, in January 1971.
Can you tell us about your mother passing? Can you tell us about that experience?
I was living with my mother, her brother and sister, and I was home alone with her, and she started hemorrhaging. So I was 9 years old. I called an ambulance, called my grandmother. She went off to the hospital, and she died about 2 weeks later. I never actually saw her again. So this was also the era and the kind of cultural context where, children did not go visit their parents necessarily in the hospital, or certainly didn't go to funerals, and things weren't discussed openly. It wasn't like a ready avenue, to deal with those feelings. And so even though I had come to a state of some much greater balance and happiness through my meditation, when I went to Australia, I'd already been practicing for quite some years. And the incompleteness of it really, and my processing of the incompleteness of my processing of it really brought it all back. And so, but also it was partly being in Australia and being in the nature of it and the feeling of it that was part of the healing.
So, for people listening that have gone through trauma, we've all had varying degrees of trauma. How can we move through them?
Well, I mean, there's so many modalities, and there's such a sense of process. A lot when you say move through them, it also depends on how recent and how intense and what you might choose to do. And a great deal of the healing, I think, is about connection. That was my experience. I had to reconnect in ways that's despair. It's right. The connection is torn apart. It's torn asunder. And so I had to rebuild a sense of connection to my practice, to the world around me, to friends. When we're really in that state, someone in a very loving way is reaching out to help us. We can't accept it. We don't even see it. So for many people, it's a process of it's reconnecting in one way or another. And it's a lot about loving kindness. It's a lot about compassion for oneself and for in terms of just kind of the technique of it, a lot of it is about titrating, and so is trauma therapy. There are ways of, you don't want to just re traumatize yourself and plunge into an experience and relive it and relive it. And, there are ways of kind of getting, as one person recently said to me, it's like a little homeopathic dose.
Mhm.
You want to be able to experience things directly and then no, you can leave. You can bring your attention somewhere else. You're not actually there anymore. You're observing it or you're even coming very, very close to it, but you're not there anymore.
Yeah, so many people are suffering though right now in this world. Like there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, and it definitely pulls on my heartstrings. So,
Yeah.
what advice do you have for someone who may be sitting in suffering right now?
It could be like, see where you can connect. Sometimes, I've had friends, one friend is coming to mind with massive, terrible depression who, and there are many modalities one tries at once. It's not one single answer, but, one of the things that was most healing for him was actually helping other people.
Service.
So he'd go out and, he is a, very accomplished, brilliant writer, and he couldn't write at that time. And he would go to some agency and he was making sandwiches for people who were homebound and couldn't, get food. And
Mm.
it was actually very satisfying for him. It was quite fulfilling. That might be it, or finding a community. You're not alone. You're definitely not alone, and having that sense of recognition. And then there are actual modalities of working with traumatic or really really painful materials. So that the key is a kind of balance. It's not to just get overwhelmed again. And it's also not to seek to push away or deny what you're experiencing, but finding a more balanced relationship, which will mean, being in a certain place and leaving it, and then being in a certain place and leaving it. So that's like a skills training.
Totally. One of my favorite mantras is this too shall pass.
Hmm.
Reminding myself of that when I am feeling that pain or whatever it is I'm going through is that nothing is permanent. This too shall pass. It's one of my favorite mantras. I just write it down and stick it on a post-it note somewhere where you can see it whenever you're going through that challenging time.
Hmm.
But I'd love to hear from you. Do you feel like we ever completely heal from our trauma, or is there always a little bit of scar tissue or residue?
I think there's probably residue, but the question is how, I guess the word is activation. Some people don't like the word triggering, and it's a question of how activated things get and in what way. And if we remember we have tools, assuming we have tools, then remembering to use them. I think people often blame themselves really harshly, like I shouldn't have gotten upset again or should be beyond this. And sadly enough, a lot of society tells us, well, you should be beyond this. You should be over this already. And it's just not fair. It's not true. Because the point isn't cutting off all reaction. The point is having a better life so that we're not just being incapacitated by those reactions or dominated by those reactions. We have other ways of dealing with them, even though they'll still come up. And that also gives us much greater compassion for ourselves and much more compassion for others.
So, Sharon, I'd love to hear. I love Buddhism and I love a lot of their principles, but I'd love to hear what are some of your favorite Buddhism principles that have really impacted your life? I know all of them probably have, but like any that have really changed and shifted things for you on such a huge level?
Well, I think there are the kinds of principles that, first of all, like my first teacher was S.N. Goenka, and it was an intensive 10-day retreat. And the first night of the retreat, he said, the Buddha did not teach Buddhism, the Buddha taught a way of life. And so that idea that you don't have to believe anything, that's not the point. The point is your own experience. And so the Buddha is very famous for having said, don't believe anything because I said it. Don't believe anything because a great elder has said it. Don't believe anything because you've read it in a sacred text. He said, put it into practice and see for yourself what's true. And I just find that a breathtaking vision of human life, of human capacity. That's based on the belief also within the Buddhist teaching that within each one of us is a capacity. It's like almost like a seed for wisdom, for love, for connection, for clarity. And that seed, that potential is never, ever destroyed. It may be, and it usually is, like way covered over or hard to find or hard to trust. But no matter what we go through, no matter what we do in life, it's never, ever destroyed. And that was also kind of breathtaking for me, that the potential is always there to kind of come back, to reconnect, to see more clearly, to care for oneself and for others. So that's also, has been very huge for me.
I found this really fascinating, the concept of loving your enemies. Can you talk to us about that and why it's important?
I would never kind of say to somebody, well, you have to forgive or you have to love this person who has harmed you so grievously. And so it's not, a kind of love that is like pander to them or agree with them or try to approve of them or, just kind of give up. It's something about a power of love that recognizes that, like it or not, our lives are incredibly intertwined, that we really kind of sink or swim together, and that, our lives have something to do with one another. And if we carry around a burden of hatred, we are going to be the ones who suffer. But that doesn't mean we ever want to be or need to be or should consider being necessarily in the presence of somebody again. It doesn't mean that you have to communicate with them. It doesn't mean ever that you should pretend that what they did doesn't matter. As one of my colleagues, my friend Sylvia Borstein said, forgiveness does not mean amnesia.
Now, let's pretend that you have a magic wand and you could put one book in the school curriculum of every high school around the world. What is one book that you would choose?
High school, huh? I might go back to the Dalai Lama wrote a book quite a while ago called Ethics for a New Millennium, which was at the millennium turn, in which he talked about a kind of secular ethics or ethics that are born of not out of religious conviction or allegiance, but really out of compassion for oneself, because we also suffer when we violate that sense of harmony, and compassion for others, and having a recognition of that. Like so many ways in which culturally, at least in the States, being ethical, being kind is considered not that interesting, especially if you're in high school. There's a certain sense, I've often said this, that kindness is like a secondary virtue, that if you can't be courageous or you can't be brilliant or you can't be wonderful, it's like, okay, be kind. It's good. It's not great, but it's good, but it is great. And seeing somebody say, you don't have to be a believer, you don't have to have that sense of identification with a certain kind of religion, but just to want to have a better human life, and let alone what it does for others and for the planet.
I wanted to ask you about meditation. For someone listening who has never tried meditation, but they want to get into it, where can they start? How can they dive into this world of meditation and mindfulness?
There are lots of possibilities. I think it's good to have either a teacher or a book or a course online or something that creates a context, because I also hear, oh, I tried that once, I failed at it. And that, of course, troubles me because we believe you cannot fail at it. That's not a
Yeah, there's
possibility. And
there's no such thing.
yeah, but then if I pursue the conversation, say, why do you think you failed at it? And people will say, because I couldn't keep thoughts away. I couldn't make my mind blank. I couldn't keep anxiety from arising. I couldn't keep sleepiness from arising. Usually it's about thoughts. I couldn't make my mind blank. But that's not why we meditate. That's not the goal, because we're not trying to dismiss any part of our experience. We're trying to develop a different relationship to all of our experience, including thoughts. It's like I wrote one book called Real Happiness, and the title is Real Happiness, The Power of Meditation, a 28-day program. And it is actually a 28-day program for learning how to meditate. You can start with 5 minutes a day, but always with that reminder, you will experience lots of different stuff. It's really okay.
I'd love to hear about your routine. Like, do you have a morning routine, a morning practice, and can you share it with us?
Both my own personal experience and what I've seen in so many students and what I understand of the science of meditation is that it's the everydayness of it that is the most significant, not like an endless period of time, not like, I need to do this 6 hours a day or it doesn't count. From that point of view, I prefer myself sitting in the morning because I feel like it helps establish a kind of platform for the rest of the day. So I get up and, maybe I have tea, and or it depends. And then I try to sit for like 40 minutes, and it may just be 20. And then I'll start in the rest of my day.
And so do you just do that one block in the morning, or do you do a second meditation in the afternoon or evening?
So I try to do that one block. And then there's this other concept called short moments many times. Many times a day, trying to take a few breaths consciously. No activity that's going to be very long in carrying it out, but just take a few moments. And that's a very powerful thing to kind of break the momentum of maybe your crazy day, feeling your feet against the ground, drinking a cup of tea mindfully, doing a walking meditation from room to room as you're at work. So that is a very important part of my own practice, is short moments many times.
I love that. Short moments many times. I really love that. Now, Sharon, is there anything else that you want to share with us? Any last parting words of wisdom, or anything that you want to talk about that maybe I haven't asked you about?
You've been great and very thorough. No, I just want to go back to that for a moment, to that thought of somebody who doesn't have a meditation practice, who's interested in it, because I really see it as an experiment. It's not to say that everybody's going to love it or want to continue it, but it's just, as I said, setting up a structure that you feel comfortable with, that you can fulfill, so that you're actually putting it into practice. You feel enough support to do that. And then you can tell. And then the very important thing is that if you're trying to assess whether meditation's done any good or is doing any good, the place to look is not that, 10 or 20 minutes you spend formally meditating each day. The place to look is at your life, because you may not see much change in that particular dedicated period, but you will find you're changing, that the way you speak to yourself when you've made a mistake, the way you meet a stranger, the way you can bring your attention back when you've gotten really distracted. All of that shifts, and it really moves the way you let people live rent free in your brain, all that.